Hi, I'm Jackie Keenan. In Chicago Business Today, merger talks reemerge. United Airlines on-again, off-again merger talks with U.S. Airways are on again. The two airlines have been at the bargaining table 3 times before in the last decade. But if they strike a deal this time, the two would create the second largest carrier behind Delta, which merged with Northwest in 2008. Managing editor Brandon Koppel talked to Crain's Airlines reporter John Pletz about a potential airline mega merger.
John, some big hurdles to be overcome before a deal can get done. What are they?
Their board of directors has got to sign off on this. Labor has to agree to do this, otherwise it's just not going to work. And then they've got to get past the Department of Justice and get antitrust approval from a Justice Department that may not be real receptive to a big merger.
Now, United's board didn't like the deal in 2008. Justice Department didn't like it back in 2001, but that was a different era, right? What's the lay of the land there?
Well, the Department of Justice may ultimately get comfortable with it because the prospects of not doing a deal could be worse than having a deal.
For the industry.
Yeah, I mean these airlines are all still in very tough shape, and the prospect of having a merger with big reductions or big cuts may be less bad than having an airline go under.
Also today, a lot of speculation that this whole thing is just United boss Glenn Tilton, his way of trying to get Continental to come back to the table after merger talks with them fell apart a couple of years ago. How does that work? What about a potential deal with U.S. Air would bring Continental back?
Well, Continental would have to consider its place in the world with not only a bigger Delta and Northwest, which has already happened, but if you merged up U.S. Air and United, would they end up being the odd man out, and how do they like their chances there? And you also have to remember that since the last go-around in 2008, United and Continental got together on an alliance, what they refer to as merger light. I mean, it's not just a code-sharing agreement. So they may not want to walk away from that. They may have gotten a good look at what they might accomplish together and decide they really do like it. I mean, it's a good fit.
United and Continental?
Yes.
So I was going to ask, which is the better fit, United Continental, United US Air?
Well, from United's standpoint, the better fit is Continental. It looks a lot like Delta and Northwest. There's not a lot of overlap. Continental has some international routes both in Asia and in Latin America that United doesn't have. There's not a lot of domestic overlap, so you wouldn't have to buy a lot of things that then you would later shut down or get rid of. There's a tremendous amount of duplication with U.S. Air, which means you're buying something to ultimately get rid of it. And there's not nearly the international upside. U.S. Air doesn't really bring anything to the table on that front.
Now, all that duplication would mean if United and US Air did end up doing a deal, they'd cut a lot of routes that they're both flying right now.
Well, they cut a lot of capacity on routes they're both flying, and they'd probably shut down some hubs.
And that ultimately could end up being pretty tough on consumers, because that would allow them to raise prices on those.
Exactly. Theoretically, prices would go up, although there's still an awful lot of competition out there. So, it depends on the route you fly.
Any idea at all how the headquarters thing could shake out if United and US Air come together?
There's a better than average chance that it stays in Chicago. Glenn Tilton is definitely a big supporter of Chicago. US Air's headquarters has moved around most recently to Phoenix after the merger with America West.
Okay. Thanks, John.
And that's all for this edition of Chicago Business Today. For more on this story, be sure to stay with chicagobusiness.com. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.